Hello my friends, and thank you for joining me here today. I've got some thrifted makeovers for you, so let's get started. The first one is this wood box that's a wall hanging. I'm going to take the hardware off of there and get this all cleaned up and give it a good sanding. Then I'm going to use DIY's Old School and paint the inside of the box as well as those inside edges. I'm going to do a couple of coats of this to get really good coverage. These are 4-inch tiles that I got from Amazon, and what I like about them is they are flat on both sides. You don't have that ridged edge like you do with the normal bathroom type tile. Each of these is getting a couple of coats of DIY's Crenoline. And I will say that with these, they aren't a sealed ceramic tile, so it did soak up a lot of that paint. It probably would be a good idea to do a clear coat first before adding the paint. Now I'm just sealing that old school paint with my Duraclear matte sealer. I'm painting the outside of the box with that same color called Crenoline. I will eventually paint the bottom, but for now I'm just doing the sides and the top because I don't want the bottom to get all messed up in the process of everything that I do to this box. So I save that part for almost last. Now back to the tiles. I'm going to take a sponge dauber and do kind of like a third coat. It will help with the brush strokes, and it also adds a little bit of texture. Once that paint is dry, I'm going to go ahead and seal the tiles on the top and on the sides with the same matte varnish. There will be a list of all the products I used in today's video down below in the description box. I'm sealing the outside of the box with my matte varnish, and then I'm going to go in when that's dry with some Dixie, Belle Van Dyke brown glaze, brushing this on and then wiping it back with a cloth, giving this more of an antique look. You can also use watered down paint for this or a wax like antiquing wax. Just make sure that the surface is sealed prior to applying this so that it's easier to wipe back. I'm using the same glaze on the inside of the box over that grayish black color to just warm that up and have it go better with the outside of the box so it all looks antiqued. Now I'm taking archival ink in the color Pebble Beach, and this is a crackle stamp from IOD's Vintage Textures, and I'm going to stamp this on. I do a little test stamp on my paper towel, and then I load it up to put it on the tile. Now these were pretty slick, so I got a little bit of movement, but it didn't, ruin it or anything. I didn't realize how slippery they were going to be. And so I'm just kind of getting like a faint crackle. I don't want a really bright, bold crackle. And I just touch up in little areas where maybe it needs a little extra bit. Just pressing that on to each tile and then pressing in little areas that didn't fill in. I'm going to use some transfers from IOD's Lover of Flowers and also Brocante. I'm using that big B from the Brocante transfer set. I'm just going to put him on like in the center, kind of at an angle. Grab my little transfer tool and apply him on here. Once I get it all down, I go ahead and burnish that with that transfer sheet. The next two are from the Lover of Flowers. I'm doing almond blossom here. Gonna lay that across. I'm not gonna be able to get the whole thing on there, so I'm just trying to figure out which parts I want. Gonna transfer that on and then burnish it down. And then I'm also gonna add the little texting that went with that transfer, just right down there in the bottom left. The next one is Apple Blossom. I'm going to do the same thing with this one facing towards the other one. so they both curve like inward towards the center of my project. And then I added some of the leftover blooms that I had cut off into the corners of the bee tile and added that little bit of text down below the bee as well. And now all three of these will get a coat of that matte varnish. Once that's dry, I'm going in with some antique gold rub and buff just around those edges, applying it with my finger. I was mistaken about the paint that I used on the outside of the box. I actually used this one, Country Chic Vanilla Frosting. I just, for some reason, thought I had used the Crenoline, but no, it was this one instead. So I'm going to go ahead and get that back, or the bottom, back, whatever you want to call it, all painted up. And then we are going to attach our tiles. I'm using Type Bond's Quick and Thick. Just going to brush this on. I don't want a lot of extra coming out through the edges when I put these in place. So I'm just trying to get a good coat and not get too much out around the edges. Get this as centered as I can using my little measuring tape to try and make sure everything's right where it needs to be. And then I'm going to press that down and hold it for a little bit. I'm going to glue on the rest of them, doing the same exact thing. And then once they're all on there, I will weight them down and let them dry overnight. The last thing to do is add that hardware back on. And this project, I've had these tiles for a long time. I was so happy to use them on something like this that I've never done before. I think it turned out really cute. Let me know what you think. This next one is another little wooden box. I'm going to make this into a shelf sitter. I'm going to remove everything and sand that down. I'm using Fusion's paint in the color Parchment to put on the back of the box because I'm going to be applying a piece of decoupage paper on here. So I want a nice white background. This is the piece of decoupage paper I'm going to use, and I'm using DIY's liquid patina for my decoupage medium. I'm going to brush that on just at a section at the top, lay that down, smooth it out with my hands, and then take like a little sandwich baggie and go over that to smooth out any wrinkles. Then I will fold that back up and apply my next section. Lay that down, smooth it out, and then do the rest of this, just working my way down. Then I will go in with a top coat of the liquid patina to seal it all in. I'm using IOD's Trimmings 3 mold to make some castings to go around the top edges of that little box. So I'm using Das air dry clay. I'm going to make 4 of these and then trim them to fit onto the front of my box. Once I roll that out of the mold, I like to take my finger, dip it in water, and just smooth out those edges. I lay these on there to try to figure out where I need to cut. So I lay one down, bring the other one up next to it so I can see the exact angle I need to cut out. I'm using an X-Acto knife. I'm going to trim that corner off, and then I will trim the other one to fit. I'm going to lay it over, find that corner, remove the other one so I don't accidentally cut it, and then just kind of press those together to make sure they fit. I'm going to do this for all 4 corners. When I was happy with how they looked, I took my Titebond Quick and Thick and glued them all down. I'm using DIY's Old School to paint these castings. I let the glue set up so that everything was secure, but my clay wasn't completely dry yet. I do like to paint my clay before it dries. It helps prevent some of the cracking and shrinking. So I'm just going to carefully go around those edges, and the next step after that is some texture on the sides and the top. I'm using a chalk paste in the color Iron Gate because I'm going to be painting that dark color anyway, so I figured I might as well use my dark texture paste. This is a little stencil that I picked up from Amazon, kind of like a brick wall, and I'm going to smooth that on there with a palette knife, finish it off at the bottom once that has dried enough to overlap that stencil, and then give it a coat of Old School. Here's where I'm just filling in any little areas I could still see some of that white clay showing through, especially in these detailed castings. It can take several attempts to get all those little spots covered. Next, I'm going to go ahead and seal all that with the matte varnish. And then I'm going to add some of my antiquing wax. I brush this on starting with the side and then wipe it back with a lint-free cloth. And then I add this to the castings as well. I decided that I wanted some of that also on that inside edge just around where that casting meets the decoupage paper, because it was kind of really light there and I felt like it would just look more authentic if I had a little bit of that on there, just to bring it all together. Now I'm going to do some dry brushing. I've mixed up a gray paint with white acrylic paint, taking most of that paint off of my brush and then just running it across those bricks. And I will do this to the castings as well. Next, I'm going to dry brush on a color called Barnwood. It's kind of a taupe color. It's going to tone down that white a little bit and just give this more color variation so it looks more natural. And once that's done, I can finish up that back side. I'm going to take the DIY Old School and first do those little narrow edges, and then I will paint the entire inside of that box. I'm adding some antique gold rub and buff to the castings, just catching the high points. I'm going to seal in that decoupage paper with the ultra matte varnish, and then I will seal in the back side with my matte varnish. Next up is this 10 by 10 frame. I wasn't really sure what was behind that beat up backing, so I was hoping this was going to work. It was a lot of work to make it work, but it did work. First thing I'm going to do is tear all that off and see what we got going on underneath. And yay, there are little staple things that I can bend up to remove that print and the glass. But what I didn't anticipate was how hard they were going to be to remove. They were very stiff, and I tried several things to pry those up, and a few of them bent easily, but most of them really fought me. And then I couldn't get them tight enough against the frame to get this thing out. So I had to. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how long this took. But I finally was able to get that out of there, and this is the print that was in there. But fortunately, it's just taped on to that backboard. So I can reuse that backboard, which is what I was hoping. So I just ripped that off of there. This is perfect for what I want to do. Now I need to remove the hanger and then try to dig out all those little staples that were holding down that brown craft paper cover. This was no easy task either. I finally, with the help of some needle nose pliers, I was able to get all those out. And then I needed to remove that glass, which was difficult. It didn't want to come out around those, what are those called? The things that you bend up and down. Um, they're like staples. They're like big staples. Um, anyway, once I got the glass out, then I was able to take it out and sand down as much of that paper that was still stuck on there so that I would have a smooth surface somewhat to apply my new craft paper to it when I'm done with this. So here's where I'm taking those pliers and just squeezing those staples up into there so that I could get that glass out. I'm going to give this frame a coat of shellac so that it won't bleed through when I paint it. I'm using the Country Chic Vanilla Frosting to paint this, and it did take about 3 coats to get coverage. So now I want to add a little bit of texture to that board. I'm using bakery tissue for this. You can use regular tissue paper, and I'm going to use my Mod Podge mat. I'm going to crumple that up so it gets nice and wrinkled, and then kind of smooth it back out and decoupage this onto that board. I want some wrinkles, not, not terribly textured, but just something that makes it interesting. So I'm going to work in sections, just spreading on my Mod Podge and then laying down that first piece, kind of smoothing it out. And then I will do the bottom section with another piece. And once that was glued down, I could just tear away that bottom part real easily. Once that was dry, I went ahead and gave this a couple of coats of the vanilla frosting. For that frame, once the paint was dry, I just took my finger sander and went around all those edges, and it was really easy to distress them back down to that original dark color. And now I'm going to seal it with my ultra matte varnish. And I'm using that same varnish for the board as well. Now I'm going to do some dry brushing on here to kind of highlight those wrinkles. I'm starting with a dark brown, I think it's burnt umber. And I'm going like in a cross-hatching motion, one direction and then the opposite, like, up and down and then across. And I'm going to do this over the entire board. I'm trying to use very little paint so that I don't get big blobs on there. I just want to kind of draw attention to the texture. And then in the end, this ends up looking kind of like fabric, so I think it turned out really cool. Then I'm going to go in with a lighter color, which it kind of almost looks kind of muddy, but I'm going to go in with some of that crinoline on top of that and gradually start lightening this back up. And then the final one was the just plain white acrylic to highlight those wrinkles. I'm using a transfer from IOD's Lost Garden. I think these are so pretty. They're like just kind of light and airy looking, you know. I don't know. I just fell in love with this. I'm going to trim this up a little bit so that it fits more closely to that glass that I have all nice and cleaned up. And I want to trim out this one flower that's going to be kind of in the way for the text that I want to put on here. So I'm going to trim him out of there and then clean up that trim job a little bit so that I don't have any like stray branch jetting off of there that would look funny. And here we go. I'm going to put this whole piece on at once. I'm going to hover, try to line it up, and then finally commit and press it down. It went on pretty straight, so I'm going to go ahead and start transferring this over with my transfer tool. I was kind of surprised at how much work it took on glass, but I think because there's no like air pockets with a like you would with a textured surface, maybe that's why. I don't know. It was just harder than I thought it was going to be on such a smooth surface. But there it is. Oh, it's so pretty. I'm going to burnish that down really well because I won't be sealing this. And now this little piece came from, I think, the is it Traditional Pots? It's a different transfer set. And I'm just rubbing that on in the upper center part of this. And then we will be ready to put this all back together. Glass down first, texture board next, which fought me again. Like, God, could it be any harder? And then bending those things back down. I got a real workout with this one. Once that's all in place, I'm taking a piece of craft paper. I'm going to put this on here, but I need to, well, for starters, I need a third hand. But I also want to mark where the holes are for the hanger. So I'm just taking a little tiny screwdriver and just kind of making a hole through the paper where the hole is. And I use that hanger actually as a guide to tell me where the other hole should be. And then I'm going to use the little screws to actually hold this paper in place to help me be able to glue this down. I'm using hot glue to attach the paper, but this little glue gun, no, it's not cutting it for this job, so I switched out to my bigger one. But just doing that first side, and then I can fold this back up and do the other two sides. I'm going to do like halfway down, I think, and then get that into place. I don't want that glue to dry before I get this laid down, so I did it in halves. And then across that bottom section. And then it was time to remove the excess, and I just used my finger sander for this. Give me a nice smooth edge all the way around. I reattached that hanger, and I think this one's my favorite. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this inspired you to go create something in your own style. See you next time.